The story kicks off with a man named Willard Russell living out in the middle of nowhere in a small place called Knockemstiff, Ohio, along with his family. They keep to themselves a lot, mostly because their religious beliefs are pretty intense, which makes the neighbors see them as kind of odd. Willard has this habit of walking out to an old wooden cross in the yard every single day to pray. That cross is special to him because it keeps dragging his mind back to the stuff he went through during World War II. Things he can't forget no matter how hard he tries. See, years earlier, Willard had been a soldier in the Solomon Islands. One day, while moving through the jungle, he came across something that would stay burned into his memory forever. There was this soldier, Sergeant Miller Jones, tied up and tortured by Japanese soldiers. They had skinned him alive and left him hanging there like some horrific warning. Somehow, Jones was still breathing. The sight shook Willard to his core. He knew the poor man wasn't going to make it, so he gave him a quick death, one shot to the back of the head, just to stop the suffering. It was the kind of thing that changes a man forever. After the war ended, Willard was heading back home when he stopped in a little town called Meade, Ohio. There he met Charlotte, a young waitress who worked at a diner. Something about her stuck with him instantly. She was warm, kind, and exactly the kind of person who made the world feel a little less dark. At the same diner, there was this other guy named Carl, a photographer who seemed way too interested in another waitress named Sandy. Nobody thought much of it at the time, but it's one of those small moments that later turns out to matter a lot more than anyone realized. Eventually, Willard's Uncle Erskine showed up to give him a ride home. On the drive, Willard handed over a Luger pistol he had taken as a trophy during the war. When they finally got back to the family house, his mother, Emma, was waiting. She was super religious too, and the relief on her face when she saw Willard safe and sound was something else. She had even made this promise to God that if her boy came home alive, she'd make sure he married a girl named Helen. But there was a problem with that plan. Helen wasn't interested in Willard at all. Her heart belonged to Roy, this preacher with a crazy level of faith. Roy believed God would protect him from anything, even poisonous spiders, and he used to dump them on his own head to prove it. Emma didn't know what to do. On one hand, she had made a promise to God. On the other hand, Willard clearly liked Charlotte, the waitress. In the end, love won out. Willard married Charlotte, and before long, they had a son named Arvin. They settled into life in Ohio, where Willard put up that wooden cross in his backyard and prayed there every day. Meanwhile, Helen came back to visit Emma one day, leaving her baby girl, Lenora, behind for a little while so she could spend time with Roy. What nobody knew then was that this would be the last time Helen was seen alive. The next day, she and Roy disappeared completely. 7 years later, her body was finally found buried out in the woods. As for Roy, his fate stayed a mystery for a while. By 1957, things weren't going so well for Willard's little family. His son Arvin was getting bullied at school, coming home with bruises on his face. Willard told him to fight back, to not let people push him around. One day, he even took Arvin out to the backyard to pray with him about it. But while they were kneeling there, a couple of hunters passed by and started laughing at them, calling them weird. Willard swallowed his anger in the moment, but after praying, instead of heading home, he drove straight to find those hunters and beat the life out of them right in front of Arvin. His lesson to his son was simple. Pick the right time, but never let people walk all over you. When they got back, everything changed in an instant. Charlotte was lying on the floor, unconscious. The doctor came and gave them the worst news possible. She had cancer, and it was bad. Willard prayed harder than ever before, day and night at that wooden cross, begging God to save her. He even sacrificed Arvin's beloved dog, thinking maybe God wanted something in return for a miracle. But nothing worked. Charlotte died, and Willard broke completely. Not long after, he took his own life, leaving Arvin an orphan. Emma, the grandmother, took Arvin in. Now he lived with her, Uncle Erskine, and Lenora, Helen's daughter. The two kids grew up like siblings, both carrying the heavy shadows of their parents' tragic lives. It turned out Roy, the preacher, had completely lost his mind years earlier. After getting bitten by one of his spiders, his face swelled up badly. He locked himself away for 2 weeks, convinced God was testing him. Then, in some twisted burst of faith, he killed Helen, believing God would let him bring her back from the dead. When she didn't come back, he panicked and buried her in the woods before running away with his crippled cousin. Eventually, he decided to go back for Lenora, maybe out of guilt or love, or both. On the way, he hitched a ride with none other than Carl and Sandy. Remember them for the diner? Well, by this point, they weren't just regular folks. They had turned into full-blown serial killers who picked up hitchhikers, force them into awful situations, and then murder them for fun while taking pictures. Roy refused to play along, so Carl shot him dead and snapped photos like it was nothing. That was the kind of monsters they were. Time jumped ahead to 1965. Arvin was older now, living with Emma, Erskine, and Lenora. On his birthday, Erskine handed him the same Luger pistol that once belonged to Willard. Meanwhile, Lenora, growing up super religious like her grandmother, faced cruel bullying at school. Arvin always stepped in to protect her, even when it meant getting beaten up himself. After classes, he would walk her to their mother's grave every single day, making sure she never felt alone. One Sunday, the local preacher announced he was leaving for a bit and his young nephew, fresh out of Bible college, would take over. He told them to let Emma know so she could cook for the new guy because everyone in town knew Emma's cooking was kind of, well, let's just say memorable. The big day came, and the whole town brought food for the new preacher, Reverend Preston Teagarden. But instead of being polite, the guy insulted Emma's food right there in front of everyone, mocking both the taste and the plate she used. It was humiliating for the whole family. Emma couldn't hold it in anymore. The moment that new preacher, Preston, made that smart remark about her cooking in front of everyone, it was like a punch to the gut. She broke down crying right there. For her, cooking wasn't just about food. It was her way of showing love, of keeping family together. Seeing her humiliated like that cut deep into Arvin too. He sat there watching the whole thing, his fists clenched. As far as he was concerned, this pompous preacher wasn't just insulting Emma's food. He was acting like it was too good for anyone but himself, like he owned the place. Arvin wanted nothing more than to knock that smug look off Preston's face right then and there. But Emma, even through her tears, stopped him. She grabbed his arm before he could say or do anything. She didn't want more trouble, didn't want to give the town any more reason to talk. So Arvin bit his tongue, but inside he was boiling. The very next day, Arvin went to pick up Lenora from school like always. And like clockwork, those same greaser punks were at it again, shoving her around, laughing at her, calling her names. He helped her gather her books, walked her like usual to their mother's grave, the place they always went after school. But this time he didn't stay with her. Normally, he sat beside her in silence, giving her company while she prayed or just stared at the headstone. But not today. Today, he had something else on his mind. Something his father had drilled into him long ago. Sometimes you wait for the right moment to strike back. And when it comes, you don't hesitate. Arvin turned back toward town. His jaw was set, his fists tight. He was going to deal with those bullies once and for all. Back in the church, Lenora eventually wandered inside to get out of the downpour. That's when she ran into Preston. She was vulnerable, pouring her heart out to him about the bullying, about how lonely she felt. He listened, nodded like he cared, then suggested they pray together somewhere private. But his words started taking a darker turn. He hinted, in that fake holy voice, that God sometimes asked for sacrifices. That God might be pleased if Lenora offered herself to him. Alone, in his car. She was too young, too trusting to fully understand what he was getting at right then. But it would become clear soon enough. Months passed. Over in Meade, Sandy, the same Sandy who ran around with Carl, her psychotic husband, started thinking about leaving him. The things they were doing, the people they hurt, the murders, it was eating at her. But she never went through with it. She came back home, trying to pretend everything was fine. One morning, Officer Lee showed up at her door. Same Lee who years ago had helped young Arvin the night his father died. He told Sandy to keep her nose clean because elections were coming up and he didn't want trouble. The way he said it felt off. And then came the twist. Sandy wasn't just some random woman. She was Lee's sister. And Lee had been covering for her this whole time, probably guessing more than he ever admitted out loud about what she and Carl were up to. Not long after, Sandy and Carl picked up some poor young soldier hitchhiking on the side of the road. They took him to the woods like all the others. Carl shot him dead, like it was nothing, like it was routine. But Sandy, she was cracking. She didn't have Carl's stomach for it anymore. That night, maybe out of guilt or desperation, she actually called the military police and reported what happened. Back at home, things took a turn for the worse. Lenora started getting sick, throwing up constantly. Then came the truth she didn't know how to handle. She was pregnant. And deep down, she knew exactly who was responsible. When she confronted Preston, the man who claimed to speak for God, he brushed it off like she was crazy, like none of it was his problem. That broke her. Lenora was terrified of shaming Emma, the grandmother who had raised her with such strict faith. In her mind, there was only one way out. One night, she carried a rope out to the barn, tears streaming down her face, and tried to end it all. But at the very last second, she changed her mind. Life clung to her. She tried to undo the knot, to climb down, but she slipped. Arvin was the one who found her. Too late. At the funeral, hardly anyone came. Preston gave a sermon about how people who take their own lives were beyond saving, beyond God's mercy. So no one prayed for Lenora. No one but Arvin in his heart. That evening, the sheriff told Arvin what he already suspected. Lenora had been pregnant. And in that instant, everything inside him locked onto one name. Preston. Arvin started watching the preacher from the shadows. Waiting. One day he caught Preston cozying up to another underage girl, just like Lenora. That was it. That was all the proof he needed. Before he made his move, Arvin said goodbye to Emma and his uncle. He knew what was coming next might mean he wouldn't see them again. The next morning, he loaded the same Luger pistol his father once owned, walked right into the church, told Preston he wanted to confess his sins. But when the door closed, it wasn't sins Arvin talked about. It was Lenora. What Preston had done. Preston smirked, shrugged it off, acted like none of it mattered. And that was the last mistake he ever made. Arvin shot him dead. Then he ran. On the road, his car broke down. He had to hitchhike. And wouldn't you know it, the couple that picked him up was none other than Carl and Sandy. He noticed the gun, noticed the way Carl looked at him like prey. Before they could make a move, Arvin shot them both. Rummaging through their car afterward, he found the photos. All the sick trophies from all the people they had killed. He stuffed them into his bag. Someday, someone would need to see the truth. When Officer Lee got the news about Sandy's death, he didn't cry. Didn't even look surprised. All he cared about was keeping his reputation clean. He burned every photo he could find in Sandy's apartment, trying to erase the evidence. But Arvin kept one. The picture of Sandy with the preacher Roy's dead body. Proof of everything. Eventually, Lee pieced it together. The murdered preacher, the dead couple, all of it traced back to Arvin. In the woods, they finally came face to face. Lee with a shotgun, Arvin with his father's pistol. Arvin explained it all, why those people deserved what came to them. Then the guns went off. Lee missed. Arvin didn't. Before walking away, Arvin slid that last photograph into Lee's pocket. Proof of the serial killings. Proof of the rot hiding under the town's pretty surface. Afterward, Arvin caught another ride, this time with a hippie headed west. He sat there in the passenger seat, utterly exhausted, thinking maybe he'd find a fresh start somewhere, maybe even join the army like his father. But mostly he just slept.